Hey folks, Nick here from Another BookTube channel, continuing the GarbAugust celebration with a paperback from hell. I read Grady Hendrix's Paperbacks from Hell book last year, and I didn't really take notes as I went through it, but there was one book that he talked about that really stood out to me because he specifically called it out for being particularly disturbing even after all these years. So when I was choosing a book for this theme week of GarbAugust, the only choice that came to mind was Let's Go Play at the Adamses by Mendel W. Johnson. Now, disturbing books are not really my thing. That feeling of being disturbed or unnerved isn't really one that I seek out in a reading experience, but I wanted to give this a shot anyway, because this event of GarbAugust, for me, is all about leaving my comfort zone and trying different forms of literature that I would otherwise have ignored. So, was my first real dip into transgressive horror a good time? Let's get into it. Let's Go Play at the Adamses is about Barbara, a college student who is babysitting the Adams children, Bobby, who is 13, and Cindy, who is 10, while their parents are away for a week-long vacation. The first morning after the parents are gone, Barbara wakes up in her bed, completely bound by hand and foot, unable to free herself. Bobby and Cindy then invite their slightly older friends over with the plan of having an entire week of unsupervised freedom. Unfortunately for Barbara, these kids are complete sociopaths, unable to acknowledge the wrongness of her imprisonment and the terrible things that they are doing to her. What follows is a depressing monotony of Barbara being abused, followed by the kids rationalizing their own bad behavior by claiming it's all part of a big game that they are determined to win. So, yeah, Let's Go Play at the Adamses is indeed a bleak book, but I never really felt myself being disturbed by it because it's a little bit too predictable in how it disturbs the reader. This book goes exactly where you expect it to. From the moment that Barbara gets tied up and the older kids come over to play, there's never really any doubt what the next steps are going to be. You know, like, oh, the teenage boy was left alone with the bound and gagged college girl for a while. I wonder what he's gonna do to her. I think Mendel Johnson kind of wrote himself into a corner with this premise and wasn't a strong enough writer to add surprises and twists along the way to keep it exciting. It's basically just a long, drawn-out snuff book, which maybe is desirable for some, but for me holds very little appeal. Johnson does try to add in some depth by switching between the points of view of the various kids, but I don't think it's very successful because they don't have anything particularly thoughtful to say. The kids are constantly rationalizing their actions by referring to this big game that is children versus adults and that somebody has to win. And there is opportunity there for something meaningful to be discussed, but it just comes off as very shallow here. I think a big reason for that is that the book goes directly into the action and spends no time building up the relationships of these characters. I think this would have been an infinitely more effective book if we got maybe just like 40 to 50 pages in the beginning of Barbara watching the kids and being nice, but maybe she restricts them in some way. Maybe she says, you can't watch TV past 8 o'clock, or you can't swim in the deep end of the pool. You know, something like that. Something that seems utterly innocuous to an adult, but can be viewed as a terrible slight to a child. We just need a little bit more here to add a foundation on which these kids are basing their terrible actions. I also think that my experience with this book is colored by the fact that generally I don't like children. My partner and I enjoy being an aunt and uncle because at the end of the day, they're someone else's problem, you know? To me, there is nothing more frustrating than trying to speak rationally to a child because they're all just so confident despite the fact that they have no life experience or context for any of the information that they're taking in. And this entire book is just that, but in the worst situation imaginable. Part of the reason I knew this book would only ever end in one way was because I know that there just isn't any reasoning with a stubborn teenager that's already made up their mind. Of course, I'm generalizing here, and I'm sure your kids are great and definitely the exception to the rule. And if you yourself are a teenager and you're subscribed to my channel, that makes you better than the rest of them. Given the cult status of Let's Go Play at the Adamses, there is obviously an audience out there for it, but I wonder if that audience was earned through actual enjoyment or if it's just infamy breeding infamy. My arbitrary and subjective grade for Let's Go Play at the Adamses by Mendel W. Johnson is 3 out of 10. Do with that what you will. If you've read this cult classic, let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. Thank you for spending some time with me today, but now it's time to get back to reading.